Hey guys, my name is Hab and welcome to another installment of the Is It Still Good series, in which I take a look at tanks you voted for on my Discord server, give them a quick glance and see if they still perform the way they used to. The first one was the IS-3 Defender. If you're interested in seeing that, that's up on my channel as well. Anyway, today's episode is about the T6 Dracula, a tier 7 hibernation medium tank. I remember when the Dracula came out how people instantly went for that because they saw the speed and went like, holy bananas, this thing's fast. And that's what I would have done as well, but I missed out again as always. When people started talking about the Helsing, however, much of my knowledge of the Dracula fell into the bottomless pit known as forgetting. People were just saying how the Helsing was really strong because it genuinely still is in the right hands even in the age of the Annihilator and Smasher. But what about the Drac? Does it still perform? Is it perhaps still good? Well, that's a thing I'll say later, but for now let's talk firepower and general damage output. It ain't great, and it never really was. Granted, the fact you have a 90mm gun is pretty neat for a tier 7 medium, but there are some other mediums at this tier with a higher alpha if that's what you're looking for. The T-34-1, the T-34-100, the CS-52 Liss. Some of these tanks even feel like they have better gun handling because they aren't going almost 70 km per hour while shooting. Granted, the Dracula has incredible soft stats on its gun, some of the highest in the entire tier. Out of all mediums on the move, the gun performs the best on the Drac. That would mean something if the other values it has were good though. Unfortunately, the rest of the gun is very lackluster. A low DPM, mediocre dispersion, and a longish aiming time are really holding you back in terms of damage output. You'll be glad to deal more than 2k. Your velocity, under our shells at least, isn't great either. Thankfully, if you're up-tiered, the APCR has fantastic penetration, so there's something to be thankful for. I think that out of the entire tank, the gun's aged the worst, and it really shows nowadays. The armor is basically nothing to talk about. It's badly armored, yes, but there's a considerable amount of spaced armor on the tank that still future-proofs it a bit. A lot of people don't know where to aim at this tank, despite the fact that the entire frontal hull can be penetrated with high explosive if you have more than 45mm of penetration. And the rear as well. Just don't aim at the sides, those are covered with those skirts. For any skilled player, the armor profile of the Dracula isn't a problem, and it still has a decent amount of health for a medium. But those weren't the reasons people were attracted to the Dracula now, were they? The mobility was what shocked a lot of people. This thing goes 0 to 100 real fast, and people want the tank just because of that a lot of the time, but, hear me out, just because a tank has great mobility doesn't make it great. An overwhelming amount of mobility can, well, overwhelm you. And before you know it, you're in front of two tanks with no way out. I see that happen so often with Drac players, it's starting to get a little depressing. The Dracula can't be played as a suicide run tank anymore, it can't ram things effectively anymore either. I mean, it never could, it's just that it could do that quite easily in the past. Now, there are a lot of tanks that are just as fast in the same tier, and the Drac has to compete with the likes of the Bulldog, M41D, and so on. That's not a favorable position to be in. Before I move on to the replay, is the Dracula worth buying nowadays? Well, I just have to say, no, it really isn't. Don't get me wrong, the tank can be a lot of fun, but the gun is frustrating to use and your mobility can't save you as often as it did in the past. Besides, I am not a fan of tier 7 tanks in general, so unless you're a fan of that tier, even then I probably wouldn't recommend the Dracula to you. Alright, so I know this has been a thing for quite a long time where I keep delaying the video, but I decided that once I finally got replays that I will show 2 videos just instead of 1. Mainly because I want to get my point across. One is going to be top tier and the other is going to be bottom tier. Because I think the Dracula's gameplay changes pretty drastically depending on how you actually like to play it like that. So, on the Hellas this is a little bit more of an unfortunate team, shall we say. The enemy team has quite a few more mobile tanks, which could actually kind of try and stop a Dracula, so Right now, it's gonna be pretty static. And as you can see here, there's already quite a few tanks that are starting to, let's just say, pile up on me, so I can only do a few rare peeks every now and then. Sometimes the side screens and the really weird shapes on the Dracula save me a couple shots, but let's just say that this isn't something that you should rely on, especially in a tank like this. Armor-wise, you're basically like a CDC, if anything. Those are quite a few, let's say, unfortunate shots, but what I want to get across here is that even if I were able to get around that entire area and flank them from the rear, it would only help me for about a shot or two, and then I'd need to immediately relocate. That's something a light tank would do better considering its camouflage on the move. Granted, the Dracula's camo on the move isn't really bad or anything either, it's just that a light tank will do it better. And also considering those one or two shots and how fast this part of the team fell apart, I don't really think it would have really helped or changed the battle result. This is still a win, but... oh, my aiming kind of died there, but... you can tell that the mobility isn't absolutely everything, especially right now given the current state of EU. It may matter in other service a little bit more, but as it is right now, it isn't that big a deal. Just APCR, just to be sure, knowing this gun. But yeah, pretty much. The gun is alright when you load Pramo into it. Otherwise, it's just a 90mm on a tier 7. And the mobility is fantastic, but the mobility is basically the only thing that makes the tank, and when you take that out, the tank kind of crumbles really easily. So, this was a pretty decent result. Honestly, the second battle will kind of end up in a similar way, or in a similar fashion, depending on how you want to phrase that, but that's basically one of the main ways that I played Dracula, at least when I feel like it. So, that's the first battle, and I'll catch you in the second one. Alright, and this is the second battle. It is a tier 8 battle, albeit whether or not it actually matters in this context is another question entirely, because I don't fight most of those tier 8 tanks. However, what I want to point out is that once you basically go to tier 8, that mobility is still kind of cool, but you look at all of the other tier 8 tanks and there are, let's say, quite a few more competent ones regarding mobility. I don't know what happened here, but yeah, let's just say that the Dracula's competition is quite a bit more fierce in tier 8. The tanks have larger calibers. The tanks have basically identical mobility. And a lot of the time, the guns perform better too. Sometimes those tanks even have armor, although whether or not that armor is actually good or not is another question entirely. LT432. But you can see something like a Smasher, on the other hand, is still quite a threat even in tier 8. The Dracula just does not have the alpha to back that up. You load the Pramo and your alpha immediately goes down by basically 35. It is quite a drop, and that's one of the factors that really doesn't help the Dracula in top tiers. In bottom tiers, I mean, excuse me. But, well, that Tiger was mainly a lucky shot. Chimera, the fact that the Chimera didn't even hit me is also quite impressive. However, I want to know that the gameplay here is a tiny bit more mobile, especially when you're fighting a lot of heavy tanks. You can kind of afford to do that in the Dracula, and you probably should too. Relocation is key in a lot of fast tanks such as this. You don't really have to sink into your Pramo a lot, or nearly as much as you normally would, but on the other hand, that also pretty much cripples your already kind of low damage output, especially for a tier such as this. So, there are a couple of things I want you to take away from this video, even if the replays don't really tell you much, and the first being is that mobility is not everything. If you have a tank that is only mobile and everything else is just okay, you take away the mobility, you have nothing left. This is kind of the same problem with the Dracula. And after that, it does not have many things that keep on giving, let's say. And the second one is, If you don't own a Dracula, don't be mad about it. Honestly, you're not missing out on a ton. It's not a huge disaster if you're missing one of these. Nobody will call you out on being a pleb or something. In fact, it probably might be completely otherwise. But those are the few things that I want you to take away from this video. Anyways, my name is Hab. If you somehow liked this video, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, whatever. And I'll catch you guys later. Bye bye.